So thanks again. Thanks to all the speakers for being also here. Thanks to the ones who stayed. So just we are going to start this roundtable. Let me introduce also Gerardo Di Giacomo, who is sitting here behind me, and who is a security engineer, also member of Cyber Saiyan and Guerre di Rete, and will co-host with me this session. So thanks, Gerardo. And so I would like to start especially from the keynotes, and but more in general, from talking about the role of supply chain attacks and what you've seen also with the SolarWinds hack. Kim, you described a very complex situation where there were different subjects, different victims, who actually didn't really communicate much with each other, or not so much, and also maybe at a certain point there was also some lack of transparency. Well, there was some, but not maybe so much. So the question is, was there any point where the decisions or the processes could have been better, or also any lesson that can be learned in terms of defense, in terms of detecting and preventing this type of attacks? And also a question on probably the situation now changed, because after SolarWinds, maybe the security also of the build environment or the build process became better, or do you think that it's still a huge problem? So I don't have a mic. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, so the question was, I didn't understand the communication question, but so obviously what needs to happen is that the build networks need to be re-architected. SolarWinds, it wasn't an easy fix. They had to actually re-architect the entire build network and add processes, add steps to the build. That's expensive. SolarWinds had to do it because they weren't going to be able to keep their customers if they didn't. They have a lot of government customers, and the customers were threatening to leave. If you have that incentive, but I think that most software makers aren't incentivized to secure the build environment, and so they're going to secure around it and do things that aren't going to require re-architecting. So I think that it's still a problem. Hopefully, huge software makers have resolved this. But I think that any software is vulnerable. Any software build process is vulnerable.
And is there anyone who also want to say something about it? Any of the? So because the other question is, what about the security vendors? Or because we have seen that they may become a target, and a very interesting target for attackers. And so this is something concerning for every other company using their services or their tools. What can we do to, in terms of both as a security vendor, what kind of practices you can adopt to guarantee that you are not a victim of this type of attack, but also in terms of the customers buying tools and services and really hoping for the best, or this is the only solution?
I mean, for this kind of attack, Mandiant was at fault only at the outer end of the attack, right? They couldn't prevent themselves from getting compromised. You're counting on your third-party vendors to secure their own systems and not be a vector for attackers to infect you. So Mandiant wasn't at fault in that regard. The fault there was connecting their Orion server to the internet so that once the attackers were on their system, then the attack could proceed. But there isn't any sort of one-to-one solution, because every attack and every campaign is different, and it's going to use slightly different details. So I don't think that security vendors are in any other in any better position, I guess, to defend against attacks. Mandiant, of course, has a lot of logging, and they've got a lot of detection systems on their network. The thing that saved him here was the logging. The detections didn't work, right? I just remind you, the only reason that this got caught was because one security researcher decided to take a security alert seriously. But those security alerts come all the time, right? Every time someone is registering a new system to the network. And it's easy to become asleep for investigating those. That's the only reason this got caught, was because one security researcher, she was new to the company, and therefore she was sort of still fresh in her job, and she decided to investigate.
Rajanish, Alessandro, I saw that you were nodding. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, so I mean, we need to remember that security is not something perfect, and this is why we all work in this field. And like, there is no way. I mean, we are always trying to minimize the risk of attack, of being compromised, but we cannot just zero it out. It's a risk. There is a residual risk that we will need to accept, because it will always be there. What can we do to minimize it as much as we can? Well, of course, there are some strategies. Like, of course, Orion, like in SolarWinds, was a trusted third party. What we need to do, what we need to do, is to elaborate strategies to vet the third parties, to perform periodical auditing of third parties, to understand what we have inside our network, and try to strengthen the defense. Understanding what can be the risk of having supply chain attacks, so attacks from third parties, like the risk of having a third party being compromised, and try to strengthen our resilience of a third party being compromised. And of course, try to adopt a zero trust kind of mentality, where we don't just blindly trust a trusted third party, because no one can guarantee you that it's not going to be hacked. And SolarWinds is probably the best example of that, because when they were reported the potential hacking, they were like, no, it's impossible. So yeah, so this is the main thing, I guess.
Yeah, like just wanted to add a bit on this. So if it comes to nation-state actors, they are very skilled. They have all the resources, and they're willing to go to any extent to achieve their goals. So if a client is dealing with government agencies and government clients, it is a sole responsibility of the vendor itself to first of all protect themselves. And as she mentioned, that logging plays a very important role in doing that, because you keep getting logs all the times, but you need somebody to enthusiastic enough to look at the logs and make sense out of it, because most of the time it's just ignored and it goes out in vain. So I think logging and monitoring is one thing, and see, if it comes to 0 days, you are helpless, basically. You just have to improvise on all the security aspects that you have in your company and work on it. And also, as Alessandro mentioned, that zero trust policy is something that needs to be practiced very seriously if you're dealing with such clients. So auditing your supply chain is something that a lot of companies do right now. So that is one thing that has to be taken seriously to prevent these kind of attacks, I would say, yeah.
Yes, so login, zero trust policies, but there is something also striking. I think it's the time that we've seen the attackers stay in the system. Sometimes it's a long time.
Yeah.
Is there a way we can reduce this time, the time to detect this type of attacks?
I think it was just logging and monitoring that would basically detect it, right? And also, so people are always known to be the weakest link in security. So if you work on people, like, train them enough, they have a sense of what an anomaly is, like what is not right. If they have a sense of it, then it's easier to point it out. Like, this is not right. This is something which looks fishy. Let's investigate. So I think that is another factor that we need to include in every corporate environment, that people are always known to be the weakest link in security.
So kind of on top of it a little bit, we're talking about time to detect for attacks, but in a lot of stories today, we heard about time to detect for vulnerabilities or exploits. We heard like multi-year vulnerabilities existing in the wild, and of course these are large companies. So it's not something that they don't focus on. So what do you think is still the problem with this? Like, why do we still getting bugs hidden in all our products that we use? And we've seen a lot of improvements, but still we have 10-year-old bugs that show up at some point. So I guess a question for everyone, but maybe Ting Yu or Orange, you've been experiencing some of this pain, or maybe it's not pain for you, but it's pain for the vendor. But what do you think that the vendor should do for faster detect? Like what practices you've seen missing? Of course, this applies to every speaker here, but what practices do you think vendors should focus more to prevent that bugs stay latent for so long?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question. The question is about why there are so many old bugs in our product.
Right.
Right. I think the security is a dynamic thing, a dynamic situation. Like I attack you, you defense, then someone attack, someone defense. The border is not like it will keep secure in next 10 years, but it's keep moving. So the old bug being found is not a big deal, I think so, because we are trying to find this old thing by our new technology to resolve such problem. Like the Microsoft, we still get hundreds of bugs like a week, a month, 2 months from the Patch Tuesday. So the problem is not there is lots of vulnerability being found in a system, but it's like how many people want to investigate themselves into finding such problem and resolve them. Yeah.
So you're saying a little bit that vendors maybe don't invest enough in finding these things early or in the right time, or maybe during development, ideally.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that this kind of plays a little bit into the complexity of technology that we have today. Like, again, many talks talk about attacking one path, then another path, then going to web, then going to hardware, then going to software, going to firmware, like trying multiple, and every stack is very complex, especially now we have libraries, open source, closed source, it's all over the place. So it is a very complex, we deal with very complex systems and getting more and more complex as we go forward. And so with a supply chain in mind, it means that there is a lot of supply chain opportunity even for a simple service, right? So how is let's say the complexity of tech stacks? How do researchers approach this complexity? How do you prioritize where to go first and where to focus last? But at the same time, how do you think about supply chain security here? We talk about trusted third parties, but like how many trusted third parties do we need? Can we deal with like hundreds of third parties? How do we manage that balance of being able to efficiently produce, but at the same time, be careful? Let's see, who can be? Orange, do you want to comment on that? You talk about multiple attack paths. I saw you poked at the API, you poked at the parser, metadata, OSS codecs.
Yes.
How do you make a sense of all of this? And especially, also if you're a vendor, like how do you make a sense of all of this complexity?
Sorry, pardon. Can you say the main question is that how do I?
Well, your opinion. I guess you explore multiple. You spread in the Sonos case. You explore the stack, the Sonos stack from
Yes.
from I'm gonna say from silicon. You have an application, but like from very deep into the device all the way to the web. So and it took you years, months over years. Is this something that a technology company can do efficiently?
Oh, I didn't gather the key of the question.
Okay, let's try something different. Okay, I'll ask you something different. Okay, let's think about OpenSSL. At some point, a few years ago, we woke up and we discovered
Yes.
that OpenSSL was everywhere, from like IoT devices, web services, and nobody knew. Like a lot of people discovered this, and that was the first example. Do you think that there are parts of the stack that are overlooked today, and they maybe hide some interesting attack surfaces that have not been explored yet?
Also, the problem is that, from my opinion, I guess I will more focus on the I will more focus on the open source and the developers. Yes, maybe some people may heard about the Zararus. It's a hacking group from the North Korea governments, and they have been target for the security researcher for years. Many people may think security researchers have high security awareness, but there are still several, maybe of my friends, got hacked by the bad North Korea hackers. So I think I would say the problem that open source developers will be targeted, and maybe such a simple attack such as the password spreading attack maybe can attack a lot of the developer. So for example, if one of the developer who maintains the popular open source package such as the Python or the JavaScript, the package, and the hacker can infect a lot of computers. And I think no one investigated this at scale before, because to doing this is a little bit too black. Yes. So I think this may be a trend. Maybe a trend. Yes.
Do you think it's a kind of a lost cause? Are we in a state where everything is too complex right now to invest in the whole stack? Or do you think what can be done? And maybe like I open the question for everyone else. How can we reason with this this complexity based on what you say on open source? Like there is an exposure on the individuals themselves, on the projects. Should researchers act like open source researchers? Should researchers work with, let's say, open source maybe for free in quotes? Because open source is about, I'm not saying open is free, they're two different concepts, but all of open source libraries are free, right? They are GPL, they're free for use, or they're very, let's say, open licenses that allow you to use this software. Should there be open source security researcher community that work together securing these open source projects that are not well funded? They're not like Microsoft or Google. They don't have time, money, resources, people that can identify these bugs. So I guess it's a question for everyone. I guess you didn't comment so far. Like, what do you think about this approach?
I think a lot of people are already involved with a lot of these open source projects, wherein us personally, we do contribute to some of the popular projects wherein we find any issues while putting those projects as part of one of our products, right? So we do get to review them from end to end. And based on that, if we find something interesting, we end up reporting it to the developers and ensure that it's being taken to that stage wherein it is fixed and has been released for everyone to use.
Is there, in your experience, this kind of sentiment across most security researchers that you talk to, or you say you think it's more like some people do, most people don't?
Well, again, it depends on what kind of target are you looking at. Like, because some targets you may want to look for some reward out of it, right? But then you take a different approach, but you still do have the disclosure in place, right? It's just that you take a different approach in disclosing that particular issue.
Anybody else has anything to add?
I guess as an open source developer, I mean, the community is always, I mean, open source projects are mainly crowdfunded, mainly sponsored by the community, mainly supported by the community. As we don't expect anyone to collaborate on a community project, of course, because it's open source. I mean, not all open source is supported by the community, actually. There are also projects supported by companies that are open source. But if we're talking about Floss, which is probably the main kind of danger, because if a product is supported by a company, you know that if you open a bug fix for a security bug, the company will probably be interested in fixing it. And maybe there is a more of a problem with a Floss project, which is community based, which has no guarantee of seeing that bug fixed with priority just because it's a security bug. So we can't expect also the security researchers to focus and spend their time on open source projects, because they will probably get a CVE at the end of the day, but they will not see their name anywhere. There is literally no revenue for them working for security, like for spending their time searching for this kind of vulnerabilities in this kind of product. So I mean, for just to come back to the increasing complexity and the stack of these applications, I mean, probably we need to understand that the applications are not what they were back in the 90s. We have really complex software. Like nowadays, to build a software, you can't just have your own developer on his own machine just doing GCC and compile the full project. We need an infrastructure to build the project, and this is why we created pipelines. Because we also need to ensure some sort of a security check, linkers, security scanning, and then we need to deploy, how to build the system, deploy, I mean, all the CI/CD story we all love and heard about. And what we can do really is just implementing the security measures that we can. For example, using software composition analysis, producing SBOM for every kind of piece of software that we need to develop. As I said, vetting the third parties. But if we actually use Floss projects and like open source third parties, there are certain things that we surely overlook. For example, if we talk about like projects that are Python based or that are just using JavaScript libraries, I mean, no one would expect back in 2020 that someone could poison open JavaScript packages using dependency confusion attack. I mean, if it wasn't for Alex, we probably wouldn't know even the attack could be performed. So, yeah, as I said before, like the only thing we can do is try to strengthen as much as we can the border, but we can't expect a fully secure software out of it. We can just implement strategies to minimize the risk and like minimize the impact in case we are actually compromised or a third party is compromised.
Another kind of touching a little bit on what you said, I think that another issue that we see is that a lot of times there is security researchers focus on discovery and they work with vendors for discovering, but then especially in open source projects, individual contributors, they don't have time, they don't have skills, they may not be fully understanding of the complexity of the implication of a bug. So do you think that all of you, and talk to you because you're an open source developer, do you think that in the bounty process, let's say in the vulnerability disclosure and research process, should the researcher be more, I'm not saying fully focused, but more focused than today on remediation and mitigation, like working with the developers, maybe ideally submit a patch, or maybe being rewarded for a patch. And this is something that has been kind of discussed at some point, but we really never like stuck. There have been some movements to push that, but it didn't work. What do you think about that?
in the end, I have a very cynical perspective of open source, of the open source world. In the end, we're doing this for free. The sponsorware model, we tried to implement it multiple times. We tried with Porchetta. This is a project actually built for supporting open source developers, but it's not, I would say it worked for a while, but the problem is that there is always the main topic is that we're trying to support a community-driven projects here. So it's very, very difficult. Of course, there are strategies. We have already some platforms that is, for example, doing the pay for bug fixing. So like bug hunter, but in the code. And they not only need to search for a bug, but also if they submit the fix, they will be paid. But we're talking about projects that at that point are crowd-funded or have a way to repay the user that submits a fix. The main problem of Floss is that there is no money being generated. So how can you award a person? Who would? I mean, the author, the owner of the repository, the author, the founder. There is a lack of accountability for this kind of stuff. So yeah, there are solutions. I hope they will be adopted in the future more and more. And that at least for important, very well used kind of module libraries, etc., they will be probably hosted in platform that can enhance and encourage security researcher and even secure coder to submit bug fixes and work on making even open source libraries more secure. That's it.
Let's switch gears a little bit, but not that much. We're still talking about vulnerability research, bug fixing, but we also talked about communication, open communication, transparency from vendors to customers, between vendors, between customers in a lot of ways. In the SolarWinds case, maybe. Luca, I ask you because you haven't spoken yet. Yeah. So. And I know you reported, your findings to the vendor, and probably that vendor, I want to imagine that the vendor wasn't really used to deal with random researchers finding something, and that's something so specific and so unique and niche. So I start with you, but all of you had experience reporting, and with Apple it's never easy. So I guess the question I start with Luca, but what were your challenges with communicating with the vendors, with that specific vendor? How did they communicate back to you? What was their interaction? Tell us more about that.
Well, actually, this is a very good question because I'm always discussing with colleagues and friends about this. Even yesterday, it happened yet another time. Sometimes I regret checking things because, especially in Italy, it creates a domino effect that it always ends up in annoying bureaucratic things. The thing is that, okay, this vendor actually was a sub-diary of a big physical security-related vendor, American one. When I notified the sub-diary, when I tried to notify a sub-diary, it was impossible to find an email like abuse, CERT, SOC, whatever. First problem. Second problem, I tried to escalate on LinkedIn. So I tried to find CISO, SOC manager, whatever of that sub-diary. Then after that, through all the experiences, I realized, let's check if this company is a sub-diary of a bigger group. And there came up that it was a sub-diary. Then I went straight to the CISO of this company on LinkedIn. And I wrote, I'm not a vendor, I don't want to sell shit. I just want to report a problem with this sub-diary. Matter of 10 minutes from sending the connection request on LinkedIn, he replied and said, tell me more. And then I explained everything and how I was not pissed, but upset on the fact that I couldn't find anything. And then he reacted very promptly. So first thing did was, and he explained me later because we had sync-up calls, was figure out why it failed the coordinated vulnerability disclosure process. So then they changed the process later on because there was effectively a failure for sub-diaries. So if the group has a very prompt reaction and process, the sub-diaries didn't implement that. So actually I helped them on that side. On the other side, one thing I noticed is sometimes there is an influence of the market, the business departments, on security. They have, sadly, everyone, many people here will have probably already noticed either internally as, if they work in product security or as external researchers, sometimes business, they have a lot of power, sometimes even veto power on security. And this probably is what happened, because when I reported vulnerability, they handled it, they had discussions, and then I was expecting a fix, a patch, hotfix, whatever, a firmware upgrade, even if it's not easy, maybe I thought there is a way. But apparently, from my understanding, they put it end of, one fact we are sure is they put the line end of life. So no hotfix. They just notify the customer this is critically, as I mentioned before, is critical. There are critical vulnerabilities. You need to remove, decommission it, and buy a new one. And my supposition, I didn't ask because it was not my business, but my supposition, and I've seen in the past with some vendors of different sectors, is that they prefer to do this trick. Because if you look from business perspective, if you put the end of life, a very critical device that can be sold as, too old to be passed, which in theory, from engineering point of view, wasn't. Because it has it's not like the Unity locks. Remember years ago in Black Hat, the US, they presented a vulnerability that if you attach an Arduino with a 9-volt battery and a DC 5mm connector to the outer part of a hotel lock, which is a Unity brand, that has a jack for battery, so a backup battery, but it's using one bus protocol. But long story short, it has an hard-coded thing that if you plug that your Arduino and send a specific packet, it opens the door. So in that case, it was not IoT, so it was not Wi-Fi, not Bluetooth, no Ethernet, so there was no way to easily update. So there, they needed to either, remove and replace the board. So there, I understand, was difficult, but this device had the Ethernet port. So in theory, and there is a software communicated remotely. So maybe there was a way. But anyway, they put it end of life, and now there are still 1,800 out there, and facing internet. So it's now I will probably inform the ICS cert in US because it's mainly for English market. But just to go back to your question, it's a problem to deal with these kind of entities. And luckily for us right now, especially in Italy in the last 15 or more years, I was dealing with, it's even worse in Italy, because you find a vulnerability, not to mention the meaning, they don't have, many companies, they still don't have understanding of what is a CVD, Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure Program, or even the meaning of bug bounty. There you start even yet another topic, because then they think that you are doing some sort of ransom, because some sort of, hi, I have a vulnerability, what do you want? No, it's just a vulnerability. Yeah, but what do you want? No, is there a vulnerability? So you broke the law. Our articles, in Italy, we have the 615 ter, which is abusive access of anything. So they say, you did that. Yes and no. I mean, yeah, it depends point of view, but they didn't do with dolo in Latin, with malicious intention. I just found it by mistake, like it happened a few days ago. I was buying in a shop online, and I put a quote, because, of course. Yeah, I mean, you are triggering me, because if you don't use a UID, but an integer, you check for two things. Quote, or if it's 1, 2, 3, you do 1, 2, 3, no, 1, 2, 4 minus 1. And then, so the idea is that then now I started to notify them, and they didn't take it nicely. Instead of, I asked them very politely in the email, I would like to speak with someone that created your website. That's it. And I didn't mention too many things, because then they, if you mention data breaches, the GDPR, that's it. They go directly for legal. So I said, I want to notify because I found vulnerability. I work in this field. I know what I'm doing. They didn't send to the web designer. They informed the legal. So yesterday I talked with them and said, yeah, we're dealing with that. We will let you know. We informed legal. I said, no, you don't need to inform legal. I mean, inform also legal. I don't care, but you need to inform the right people. So till nowadays, it's hard to deal in some. So luckily there are countries more enlightened than in Italy. There are companies like big ones that they have CVDs, bug bounties programs, PSIRTs, product security incident response teams, managers that understand what they're doing, and receptive and polite. So, and then there are bug bounty brokers or programs like HackerOne, BugCrowd, and so on and so forth. So overall, it's getting better, but we could do better, especially in Italy. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to focus on the it's getting better part. So my question was, on the contrary, what are some of the best practices from companies, from vendors, when in dealing with vulnerability disclosures, or also in dealing with incident response, because incidents happen. I think we can agree on that. So the difference is the preparation and the response at the end, right? So
Yeah. Well, actually, just concluding is getting better, I have to admit that nowadays in Italy, usually when I find these kind of vulnerabilities and to avoid all the legal problems that can derive from, these kind of companies that are very ignorant in the matter, I just take all the information I have, all my evidences, and notify our either CERT, CERT-PA. They're all friends like us, so we know all each other. But they help me to because once the authority is informed and they go back to these vulnerable companies, well, it's the authority notifying you. So they will not threaten them to send the legal. So they say, yes, sir. And, because then they also inform them that there is one thing called GDPR, the 72 hours data breach and blah, blah, blah. And, what is 5% of your, income. So when the authority, so that I used to get used to this trick. Going back to your question, well, best practices, there are plenty of best practices that even nowadays in Italy, okay, if we talk about product security, for example, because product security can be offensive, like testing in different phases of the life cycle, and defensive, either threat detection, certain phase during the life cycle in production of the product, like, logs, which and how, or what logs is sending back to the company where that appliance is installed, or incident response, or product security incident team-related activities. So, or if we start from the best practices from proactive product security, I would say, well, first and foremost, one thing that misses nowadays, especially in Europe, is the concept of the CPSO. I mean, everyone here probably knows CISO and CSO, but how many of you heard about CPSO, Chief Product Security Officer? That's a thing that in the United States, you know better than me probably, it is there already. I mean, we need a person at C-level that has C-level understanding, C-level capabilities and executive power, but is coming from exclusively product security. Because the CISO is taking care of infrastructure security of the company, so company assets. CSO, especially in Italy, is a former military guy that is taking care of the security of the assets from a physical point of view, physical security point of view, so protection, riots, and so on and so forth. But who cares about the products? For example, here in Italy, who is the responsible of the product security? The CISO? Then he's doing a double job. But maybe a CISO doesn't, he has perfectly understanding of Active Directory, call it logs, detection, retention, threat detection, threat intel, but is he specialized on knowing how your product works and how you can attack it? Or, who does security architecture review? Who does threat modeling? So you need to start, there is also the concept shift left. So apply security not only at the end with the pen test, but, apply security at each phase of the of the software development lifecycle. That's why we have the secure software development lifecycle. So we apply security at each phase. So we should have already from the top executives, someone responsible for that. And then from there, going down, have someone that can oversee, the different activities. For example, threat modeling, I would say security architect is a good place. Security architect can do also security architecture review. Then, developers. Who checks that developers are coding properly? Or did the developers receive any secure coding training, like the training that happened here with Silvio, the trainings during last days? So who oversees that? Who enforces that? Is there, yes or no? That's usually the question I ask around the companies, especially in Italy. If there is not, what could be the best approach to follow and the cheapest one? Because, of course, if you are like Facebook, you have enough budget to implement something like that. But if you are a small, medium enterprise in the middle of Italy, try to, as a possible CPSO or CISO, go and ask the management, the CFO, if like budget for something like that. Then you start small. So like, for example, one silly thing that can improve things is, imagine that you have a security team, you send them to a training, can be any security team. But the point is that they, at a certain point, either they go for a training or you give them like 1 day per week of research and improvements. The point is that they need to be good at application security, okay, at different levels. Once you reach that point, like 3-4 people team, then you can bring in one representative of each of the dev team. I mean, if your company makes different product, take one representative of each team, and then turn these guys, like give them heavy trainings for 2 or 3 weeks, and then turn them in the so-called security champions. Big corporation from the United States started that years ago, like Microsoft and so on. And the security champion, what is? Is a developer, is still a developer or a QA or a performance guy that works very close to a specific product. So it's part of that so-called dev team, let's say. And then you train him, you brainwash him, you put him back into the dev team, and he is not a pen tester, he's not a security architect. He's still doing his job, but you allocate him a certain amount of his time, so you still, I mean, he's still not paid more. It's just, you know, same budget, but you reduce the amount of dev hours to do either secure coding review, I don't know, running automated tool. You can start with automated tool. There are plenty even open source. You don't need to buy thousands of euro of license for 45, for example. And then you start, you know, you step up, and then when that's proved working, then maybe if you don't have yet a SecDevOps pipeline, you know, secure CDCI pipeline, you can start aiming at that, and then you scale up small and small. So there is not this idea that you need a lot of budget to start doing something. There are already pseudo solutions that, you know, in the previous job I was working abroad, we did like that like 7 years ago. We started that where the manager, me, attacker, one defender that was doing code review, and the security architect doing threat modeling. And from there, in 7 years, we grew up on around 25 people around the world doing exactly, then it appeared, you know, from a small group, then it appeared like different teams, like, you know, sort of AppSec red team, or ProdSec red team, and then, you know, defensive and so on. So this is a way I would suggest as best practice.
Thank you.
To add to this, I would like to, you know, just continue the talk. So this is what Luca mentioned, that we can do it from inside, you know, but as we being researchers, you know, we deal with a lot of companies, we report a lot of issues to the companies. So the thing that companies can do is being approachable, first of all, and the second thing that companies can do is treating security researchers as their friends and not their enemies. You know, because this thing is there a lot in the industry that you report a bug or you report a security vulnerability for that matter, and you are seen as a foe, like, you know, even inside the company and outside the company, because the teams that are inside the company are now accountable for that issue. And then the management sits around with them and saying, like, you know, why did you miss it? Because what we've seen in the past is crowdsourcing, like, you know, bug bounties and all these things have immense strength. It's just that if you are welcoming enough, there'll be millions of researchers working on your product, trying to find vulnerabilities in all possible ways. You just have to be approachable. So that's what, like, you know, we had experiences with Apple in the past, wherein they were quick enough to, you know, work along with us, patch issues in a matter of days, and sometimes it takes forever. So it has to be, like, you know, a two-way communication. I would like to say, you know, we worked in the past with Tesla also. Their team is really approachable. They, like, you know, work on every root cause. They help you out with, you know, understanding what is implemented inside. Why do you see this behavior from outside? Because, you know, we are doing a black box kind of an assessment, and they have a more better view when they are from inside, doing it from the inside. So yeah, that is one thing that I would like to add. Be more approachable, treat security researchers as your friends, and it would cause wonders.
So Apple has been famously unapproachable historically,
Yeah.
right? We have not seen much, you know, communication from Microsoft, from Apple about security issues.
Yeah.
You kind of mentioned your experience, but like, what was some highlights in your interactions with Apple?
So I'll just continue my thing, and then I'll let Hardik continue it after that. So Apple is, again, as you mentioned, that it's famously known in the market for being, you know, notorious, you would say, sometimes. So it totally depends on the team that you're working on. So I've worked on work along with the applications team as well. which deals with the application side of things. And they were very quick, like, matter of days. That's what. And the phone team, I think, takes it a bit slow. And there was a lack of communication, to be honest. So there was a very much lack of communication. We had to go back to them always, like, what's the status, because we are actively involved with them in terms of communication. Like the recent 0 days that came out, there was a random researcher on Twitter. I just read through one of the tweets. He mentioned that he found, I guess, 7 odd parsing issues in their libraries, but Apple never paid for any of them. And it is the parsing issue that led to the zero-click that has been out in the wild for some time now. So it is always a mixed experience. Hardik, you want to add something?
And I think to add to that, when we started asking for feedbacks from Apple on timely basis, but it's just that they need to work on being more transparent with the researchers in order to improve further on a lot of these things. So yeah, some of the issues may even go unnoticed, like the one that he mentioned about parsing issue. Likewise, the one that we sent them was directly communicating with the baseband of the device, right? So if something goes wrong in there, it just, you have the entire device for profit. So.
Is there any question from the audience? We would like to open up questions from the audience. Anyone?
Actually, I have 2 questions. I will start with the first one, then we can check if we have still time to discuss also about the second one. The first one, it's about bug bounty platforms, let's say. In the recent days, we have lots of bug bounty platforms which are accepting bugs, which is nice. They are fixing bugs, they are paying reporters and stuff, which is always nice. But most of them, I'd say, they are not allowing disclosure of the stuff you have found. So you might disclose stuff maybe without mentioning who is the company, but still it doesn't really bring added value if you are customers of them. Like if you're a researcher, maybe you learn a new technique, which is nice because maybe you can apply the same technique on other targets and maybe you can get bounties yourself or you can fix your software or whatever. But if you don't mention the company, then you might have their customers not aware of what happened because maybe in their changelog you just get something like security issue fixed or even just improvements, changelogs. So what do you think about that? And do you think that's like bad from a certain point of view? Because I remember that before, when bug bounty was not a thing, most of the people were releasing their findings, whatever, fulldisclosure.org, mailing lists, whatever, they are just publishing details, no matter. While now, you are scared because if you start publishing stuff, you are breaking the contract with the bug bounty platform and then you get caught out, you get pulled out of the platform and then you cannot get bounties anymore. So what's your thoughts about that thing?
So to add to this, so there is a very good, very interesting study that happened with one of my very close friends. So he found 7 account takeovers or 7 account takeovers on an application. So he was basically bypassing the fixes and always, finding issues that were leading to account takeovers. And he wanted to blog about it. And the thing was that he blogged about it, but literally removing every trace of the application. You cannot identify that it's an application. And I was the one who proofread it. And then he published it out in the wild. And he just notified the company that, I've done a technical write-up. If you would like to have a look, please do. Please feel free to have your feedbacks. And that guy was just taken out of the platform, literally banned out of the platform. And the thing that the client mentioned was this violated the policy itself, but there were no details. There were literally 0 details about the application. Then the client mentioned that it was the UI that disclosed that it's that application. I said it's very generic. You cannot basically make out that it's the same application. But in this regards, the bug bounty platforms, they mainly favor the client because that's where they're earning the money from. And the researchers are basically the ones who are helping them out doing that. But I've seen a lot of cases wherein the platforms, they mostly favor the clients and not the researchers. So that has happened. Like, it's an evident event and a real life event. So just wanted to add to that. Apart from that, disclosures are a thing now. I think HackerOne supports it. Bugcrowd does support partial disclosure. But yeah, like, because us as researchers, we like bragging about the stuff that we find, right? That's the only medal that we have. Money comes next, but bragging about good stuff that we find is something that we feel proud of. And there has to be something in place to allow us to do that in a restrictive manner, if possible, without naming the clients or so, or even taking the permission of the clients. And sometimes some clients do that. So I think that has to be there, like, the mediation of the platform, the client, and the researcher working all together to achieve this has to be made, possible. So if there's somebody from any bug bounty platforms, please listen to our views on this, and please help us out with that.
Or even like fine-tuning the disclosure guidelines. Maybe you disclose something and then there is no bound on you to disclose it after, say, 90 days or maybe 180 days after you have reported that issue and it has been fixed. So yeah, maybe some fine-tuning in the guidelines.
Yeah, and also see some connections with the Kim talk about supply chain attacks. Like, if you are a customer of those companies and then you learn that they were hacked because there was a vulnerability, maybe you don't know if someone exploited the vulnerability before the security researcher who reported the vulnerability, but you know that it was there and the attacker might have accessed those kind of data. You might protect yourself because you might say, okay, maybe I should change all the accounts which I had there, or I should change some configuration, or I should review some specific systems to be more secure, let's say. But yeah, the fact that disclosure is not really a thing recently is, from my point of view, is getting worse because yeah, there are less people disclosing full details about companies because of being scared of being kicked out from platforms. So yeah, and that was the first question. I don't know if anyone else have comments about that. Otherwise, we'll go to the second one. Okay, see no comments, so I go with the second one. The second one, it's about the Pwn2Own thing. So you guys participated in the Pwn2Own, and you mentioned that at some point you learned the targets of the Pwn2Own, and then, I don't know, 6 months later, 8 months later, even 1 year later, there is the Pwn2Own. So the Pwn2Own basically is pushing you into finding bugs really early in the process and then sitting on the bugs for like 1 year before the Pwn2Own happens, and then you can report the bugs. And this means that this is kind of controversial for a company because as a vendor, like Sonos or Microsoft or whomever, you want those bugs to get fixed like the day after they are discovered, not 1 year after they've been discovered. So I feel that this is kind of pushing in the wrong direction because like they are pushing you into just waiting like whatever time before you can report the bug and get the money. And obviously, you as a security researcher, you want to wait because you want the money, which makes sense, right? So what do you think about that? This is for everyone, not just for the Pwn2 owners.
Pwn2 owners.
Okay, I go first. Actually, we didn't find, we won't do research on the Pwn2Own target for like a whole year. Yeah. We will do that until they disclose the target list. And the other time, we do another research, such as Windows kernel, like some Apache, Linux kernel, and something else. And you mentioned if we found a bug very earlier, like there is a Pwn2Own event like 8 months later, what we would do, we will report the bug to the vendor. Because the Pwn2Own event is not our goal. It's just like a casual team building.
Yeah, we treat it as team building.
We treat it as a team building.
Yes.
Yes. So to earn money is like a side effect. The side effect of finding a bug is to make you rich, something like that.
Yes.
So we will report it. If it's a valid target on ZDI, the zero-day institution, which is the host of the Pengzhuong, we will try that. But if the bug is very severe, we will try to contact the vendor directly. Yeah, without any money. But that's the core spirit of our company. So we are okay.
You are responsible, so you are acting the good way, but maybe others are pushed to sit on bugs, just waiting for the competition. It would make sense, right?
Yeah, but I think it's a kind of trade-off, because if there's no any event such as Pengzhuong, then where all these bugs go to? Maybe dark market or something like that. Yes. Any comment?
Good.
Yeah,
Orange approves it.
Orange is my manager.
So, see? Okay. So if there are no other questions from the audience, I have a final question, so maybe then we can wrap up. Maybe more for Kim and maybe others, actually. It's more corporate question, actually. So to what extent breaches are affecting now executives and security architects? To what extent? We have seen also in the SolarWinds case, there's been also the Security and Exchange Commission, taking some initiatives. So I was wondering, are the stakes raised now for also people working in security or even executives in the companies after they suffer a breach, or it's just something that then life goes on and no one is really impacted inside the company?
So the question is, what are the consequences for companies that are experiencing breaches? I mean, so they're increasing in the U.S. Because we've got the FCC that is starting to fine companies. We've got the SEC doing investigations. I don't know if you're aware that SolarWinds is under investigation right now by the SEC. There were a couple of investigations. One is that some of the executives were trading stock in about 7 days before the breach went public, and so there are some questions about what they knew or what they might have known at the time. So we're having a lot more regulation in the U.S., and the second investigation that they're doing is on whether or not there was negligence at SEC that would have enabled this attack to occur. So we are seeing more government agencies trying to find what kind of powers they have to push companies and potentially fine them. So it's increasing. And we're also seeing just more regulation coming in. Post SolarWinds, we've had a lot of activity from the White House regarding supply chain and attempts to secure that. So I think there has been some movement there.
Okay, so, well, thank you. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the audience who stayed with us till late. And thanks again. Thanks for being at RomHack.
Thank you so much.